Hey, welcome. It's Jordan, and we're going to be walking through a software startup crash course, how to build a successful software as a service, or a SaaS as they call it. Now, the first thing I want to get into before we talk about how to actually build a SaaS is, do you actually want to build a SaaS, right? Is this for you? Because it's not for everybody. And although it sounds very tempting to want to start a SaaS, it is very difficult. Requires a lot of hard work, takes a lot of time, but it does have pretty amazing payoffs. Now, some SaaSes have 90% profit margins, okay? So very amazing payoffs if you can do it right. But it is difficult, takes a lot of time, there's a lot to do, but again, the payoff is pretty big. So maybe you have little or no startup capital to hire a developer or to really do anything. And that's actually okay. So a lot of people say that SaaS is really expensive to start. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It certainly can. And you hear about all the Silicon Valley tech startups in software that are raising millions and millions of dollars. You don't have to go that route. Okay, you can start with little or no money. And it actually doesn't matter if you don't know how to code. You can still start a SaaS. And we're going to get into these methods of how to do this with no money and how to do this if you don't know how to code, because those seem like pretty important things whenever you're building a software, but they're actually optional. Now, will they make it easier for you? Potentially, but it's not necessary. And so we're going to talk about those and just understand that it is going to take you probably 6 months or longer before you have a working product that is actually selling to other people. Okay, so hopefully you're still on board with that, but I just wanted to kind of clear the air and make sure that you are the right person to be watching this video, because this isn't going to be something that you can whip up in a couple weeks and start making money. It's not going to work like that. So what exactly are you going to learn today? Well, I'm going to walk you through the 10 steps of building a SaaS. Now, why 10? Because I broke it into 10. The matter of the fact is there are way more steps than 10. Okay, every one of those 10 steps can be broken into sub-steps, and those sub-steps have sub-steps. So there is a lot to do, but I broke it down into 10 steps so we can take a look at it from a very high level overview. And so you can look and see, okay, these are kind of the main chunks of everything that I would need to do. And the first few steps need to be done before you actually do anything else. So you have to understand that there's things that you must do before you start developing the product, before you start selling the product, before you build the product, before you make anything. You need to do a few different things, and we're going to go into those. And then you need to understand the logic of developing software. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to know how to code. It doesn't mean that you have to learn how to code. It just means that you need to understand the logical process of how software works and how to develop software. Okay, and we're going to get into that. And then finally, we're going to talk about actually launching and the marketing strategies that are working right now. So these are the 10 steps to building a successful SaaS. And like I said, all of these can be broken into smaller steps, but we're going to get into these individually, and I'm going to explain each one, and we're going to kind of dive a little deeper into every one of these steps. I just want to give you an overview. Here's the overview of all of the different steps that we're going to be getting into. And the first couple are steps that need to happen before you actually build anything. And so let's get into the very first step, which is research ideas. So you want to look for problems that need to be solved. That is actually the best way to build any product or make money in any way. And that's to find a problem that is in need of solving. And the thing is, and it's really cool actually, we're living in the tech age. There are so many problems that can be solved with software. So the best way to come up with an idea that I've found is to pick an idea that you actually have, or someone that you know has. And think of all the different, maybe softwares or apps or products that you're using right now, and think about how could they be better, right? How could I make this particular software better? For example, maybe you use a productivity software that you really like, but you wish it had this feature. How could you improve a current product to make it even better? And something that is actually really interesting to think about that I like to do is actually think about things that you could take out from another app to make it easier to use and cost less. For example, you've got really complicated and huge products that have tons of different features in them, and maybe the user doesn't need all those features. Maybe they just want one little feature out of that. Well, you can just build a single feature and you can charge a lot less, so that's better for the customer, and you can make it a lot better, and so that's going to give you a better value for your product as well. So don't just think about how you can make another app bigger or better. Think about how you can take things out to make it easier and cheaper for a customer to use. Now, maybe you already have an idea and you think, oh, forget this. I'm going to skip all these steps and I'm just going to jump right into building it. You need to slow down because you need to verify that that idea is actually good. And I don't mean just ask your friends. I don't mean just ask your mom or your parents. What you need to do is you need to ask relevant people in the market that are actually going to want to buy this product when you're done with it. All right. So it helps if you know people in the market, but even if you don't, you can just DM people. So maybe you're building a SaaS that helps musicians connect with record labels. So you want to reach out to musicians on social media or email or any way. You can go to their show and watch it and then try to catch up with them afterwards. However, you can get a hold of them, but you want to reach out and just ask. Right? You're not selling anything because you don't have anything to sell right now. And so it makes it really easy to just say, hey, I got this idea that I think might actually be a pretty useful tool. It kind of works like this. And is that something that you would be interested in using? And, you don't need to say, oh, it would cost this or whatever. Just ask if that's a tool that would be useful. Is that a useful software? You can ask people on Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, any other social sites. And what I would shoot for is asking maybe like 100 people. And of the people that reply, if 80% of them say yes, then I would say you've got a pretty good green light to go for it. Now, you can't do it if less than 80% say yes. But obviously, the more people that say yes, that it's a good idea, is more likely that it's going to be a successful idea. So verify your idea. Don't just assume because you and a couple of your friends think it's a good idea that it is. You need to actually go out to people that are actually going to be the users of your software and ask them if they think it's going to be a good idea. Once you've asked a bunch of people and a lot of them have said yes, you need to start pre-marketing your product. Notice we haven't started building a product. We haven't written any code. We haven't looked for anybody to write code for us. We haven't done anything with the product, right? We haven't even drawn up what it's going to look like. But we need to start selling the product. And I know it sounds a little weird to start selling a product before it's even made, but the whole purpose with this is that you get the idea in your future customer's head that your product is going to be really good and that they're going to need your product. And you want to be marketing and continuing to market the entire time that you're building the product, right? But you don't necessarily want to start marketing before you've actually verified the idea. You only want to do this once you're for sure going to build it, once you're for sure like, okay, this is a need. This is a problem that I'm going to solve. People want this. I'm going to build it. So the best way to pre-market that I've seen is to build a landing page and collect leads and just get their email, get their name, and just build a list of emails of people that will want to use your software. So you can build a lead page usually with a tool like Lead Pages or ClickFunnels, whatever, or you can just build your own if you know how to code, or any way that you want to build a lead page is completely fine. And what you want to put on this lead page is information about the product, right? And as you're building it, you can add mock-ups, you can add kind of screenshots of what it might look like. But in the beginning, you kind of just want to describe the product the best way you can, and then get people that are interested to join and give you their email so that later, when the product does launch, you have a group of people that you can launch it to. So what's really nice is you've already asked a bunch of people if they think it would be a good idea to build. So you can just contact those same people. You can just say, hey, I reached out to you, a couple weeks or a month ago, and I asked you if you thought this tool would be a good idea. Well, I've actually decided that I'm going to for sure build it. In fact, you can check it out on this website and just send them a link to your lead page. And they can read about it. And if they want to opt in to your email so they get notified when it comes out, they could certainly do that. And like I said, you're going to want to have this up during the entire time that you're building the app. And as you're adding different things to the app, maybe you're going to want to update this page to reflect that as well. But pre-marketing is a very important step because it's the difference between launching to no one and launching to a group of people that you know are really interested in the product and you know actually already want it. And that is way better than launching to 0 people. And now it is time to actually design a mock-up, right? So this is going to be something where you draw out what you want your software to look like, right? And you can use a tool. What I like to use for mockups is a tool called Figma. It's free, it's online, you don't have to even download anything, and it's really, really great at drafting different software. So you can do apps, you can do software as a service, you can do any kind of program that you want to develop, but you don't have to know how to code to use it, which is great. So it's all, kind of drag and drop, like drag things out and draw stuff. And even if you're not a really creative person, the only thing that you really want to do is design essentially what's called a wireframe, something that is the layout for how you want your SaaS to look. Like maybe you don't know the colors yet, maybe you don't even know what you want to call it. That's completely fine. But what you do want to know is all the things that your software is going to do, and then what it's going to look like. Okay, so that's the whole point of this step is to lay out. What does your, dashboard look like, right? What does the main page look like? Where are the buttons? Where are the input fields? If there's going to be kind of design where you want everything to go. This is going to make your life a lot easier. If you code it yourself, it's going to be a lot easier. And obviously, if you hand this off to a developer to make, it's just going to be, you have to have this. You can't not have some sort of design of what you want the software to look like when you have another person working on it. Like you have to know what it's going to look like. So you want to just design this. Again, Figma's really good, but you can use Microsoft Paint if you really wanted to. One of the first softwares I made, I literally drew up on a piece of paper, and then I drew it again in Microsoft Paint, and then built it off that. So you don't have to use fancy tools. They do make your life a lot easier, though. But you can use something simple as Microsoft Paint, or you can use Photoshop or any kind of a tool that you want that you can draw with. The whole point of this entire step is to really get the idea that you have in your head and put it on paper. And the thing is, even if you're going to do all this yourself, you still want to do this step, because sometimes you get it out on paper and you're like, wait, that doesn't actually look as good as I thought it would, right? This layout doesn't really make any sense. Like, the buttons and the inputs, they don't, work well together. This doesn't really tie in what I'm trying to do with the SaaS. So you really do want to draw out exactly what you want your SaaS to look like. And after that is going to be kind of a complex step, but it's actually a very important step, and that's understanding the processes. Your SaaS is going to do something, right? At the very least, you're going to have to create some way for a user to log into your software, right? So that itself is a process. And so these processes happen, through functions and through API calls and other methods. But what you want to do in this step is you want to just pull up a spreadsheet, Google Sheet, Excel, whatever, and you want to lay out every single process that your software is going to handle. So if your software is like a calculator or something, then when a user clicks this button, we're going to multiply these numbers together, we're going to add these numbers, and we're going to, compute this calculation, right? And that's a process, right? And then maybe display that to the user, right? So there's multiple steps in a process, and maybe at first you're not going to know all the steps that might need to happen and what goes on behind the scenes, but you do know what starts that process and what that process might end with. And you want to list as many as you can, because the more that you can list, it's going to be a lot easier to build a modular system. And if you don't know exactly what a modular system is, it's a great way to build software, which means that every single piece of the software kind of stands on its own, right? It's able to operate in its own little box. And so a great example of this is Netflix, the company Netflix, the huge company that uses 30% of the world's bandwidth for streaming movies, but they have 60 years more microprocesses that run their entire software. So there's a lot going on in Netflix, right? But they have a microprocess for all the different things. They have a microprocess for allowing users to log in and register, right? That's a microprocess. Another one is showing them their recommended movies or TV shows. That's its own microprocess. And all of these different things operate disconnected from everything else, right? So they can operate on their own. So the whole purpose of building a software like this is that if your software were to break, or if one of these functions were to not work right, It doesn't destroy the entire system. So it's a really good design principle to build with modularity in mind, that you can work on these individual pieces and every single piece is going to operate the way that you want it to. And even if you're not going to be coding this yourself, you still need to understand each and every process that your software is going to handle, so that when you do hand it off to a developer that is going to code it, they know all of the different functions that need to be written and all the different things that your software is going to need to do. So I know this might be a little confusing, so I'm going to give you a couple examples from a recent project of mine. And honestly, this first one is an example that pretty much every SaaS is going to have, is when a user registers, as in they type in their name and their email on your web page, what happens? Well, their information gets added to the database. Now, there's other steps that happen in between those two things, but that's the beginning and that's the end. Right? So maybe the things that happen in between are the user clicks submit, it gets sent to the server, the server validates that information, the server then, encrypts their password, and the server also sends them an email, like a welcome email, welcome to my software, or whatever, and then it adds all their information to the database. So there's a lot of things that can happen in between. And the thing is, the more steps that you can add that you know about into the process, it's going to make it a lot easier to actually develop that particular function, because you're going to know all the steps that need to happen. Now, when you're first developing and designing your very first SaaS, you're not going to know how these processes work, and that's completely fine. But you do need to understand that listing out all the processes that you do know, or functions that you do know that your SaaS is going to have to implement, are going to make it a lot easier to build. So another example is going to be like if a user publishes a page. Let's say you have a SaaS that allows users to make their own web pages or something. When they click publish, maybe it uploads that to static storage, and then it clears the cache, and then it stores those changed informations in the database. That's a little more complex of a function, no doubt, but you'll notice that there's two steps in both of those. The user registration and the user publishing, that is add information to the database. And so when you can see that you've got overlap, right? When you've got overlap in processes, you say, oh, well, actually this step is the same step that I would use in this process. What you can do is you can break that step out into its own a completely separate microprocess, right? So maybe you have a function that just takes some information in and stores it in the database, right? So that's its own standalone thing. And then you can reuse it over and over anytime that you need it. But it allows that particular function to operate on its own. So if other things break somewhere else, then this particular function will still operate if it's operating correctly. So I know that this step's a little confusing, especially if you're, know nothing about software development, but just understand you will learn this with time. You'll understand all the processes that happen in a SaaS. But if you can start by just listing all the things that your SaaS is going to do, then that's going to be an amazingly great start, especially if you're not going to develop this yourself. You're going to hand it off to a developer. They will thank you a lot. So now comes the hard part, which is actually building the thing, right? And you've got several options here. Now there's more options than I have listed, but these are kind of the big ones that I see everybody doing out there. So there's code it all yourself, which is the route that I've gone down. I learned to code, taught myself how to code, and actually built the software myself. You can also hire a freelancer agency. I've gone down this route, and it didn't work well for me. I do know plenty of people that did hire freelancers and agencies, and it worked really great for them, and they were able to get their software built, and they're really happy with it. But it didn't meet my criteria, and I was actually pretty disappointed with what the agency that I hired to build my software did, and I ended up scrapping their work because it was pretty bad, and I built it all from scratch myself. Now, hopefully that won't happen to you. I do have a video on my channel about how I lost a bunch of money doing this and ended up building it myself, so you can go watch that if you're interested in my blunder there. But another option is going to be to hire a full-time developer. Now this option, as well as the freelancer agency, are going to be your most expensive options, but they require the least amount of work on your part. Okay. So although you might not have to, actually code anything yourself or learn how to code or do that, you still need to manage these teams, right? You need to manage the people and oversee, make sure everything's going smoothly. But overall, it's going to be really expensive. Consider, a full-time developer, if they're good, probably makes 6 figures a year, and divide that, by 12. That's your monthly cost to have a single developer. Now, are there developers in other countries that will develop your software a lot cheaper? Yes, but in my experience, you get what you pay for. If you hire a developer that only costs a few $100s a month, well, you're going to get a few $100s worth of software, and it's not going to be good. Now, does that mean there's not diamonds in the rough, or that there's not a needle somewhere in the haystack? Sure, you might be able to find a developer that is amazing and also really inexpensive, but most likely not. Most likely you're going to get stuck with someone that doesn't really know what they're doing and builds a really bad piece of software. So if you're going to go the whole, I'm going to hire somebody to do this, be sure that you don't, get the cheapest option, because I didn't even get the cheapest option. I actually hired one of the more expensive agencies that I found, and they still didn't give me the work that I wanted out of them. It was still not the best product, and I ended up learning and coding it myself, and it was better than what they made, which is just honestly really confusing to me, because I'm a complete beginner at developing, and I was able to build something that I liked more. Now, obviously, maybe I'm just biased and I liked it more, but it also works really well. So it was a little confusing to me, but you get what you pay for, and you got to figure out, is it worth it to take the risk of this potentially not working out very well? The last one is something that I have not done, but I'm actually really interested in doing, and that's partnering with a co-founder. Now, if you're not wanting to code, then you're going to want to partner with a technical co-founder. Now, I personally do like to code, and so I'm actually looking for a non-technical co-founder. Now, the difference between those two is kind of, you can kind of infer it from the name technical, is the technical co-founder's going to be the one that builds the product. They're going to be working on the code. They're going to be upkeeping, the features. They're going to be adding stuff. They're going to be fixing bugs. They're going to be doing anything that involves the software side. Whereas the non-technical co-founder is going to be doing all the business kind of stuff. They're going to be acquiring customers. They're going to be doing the marketing. They're going to be doing the content development. They're going to be handling support. They're going to be doing all the different kinds of things like that, really building the business, whereas the technical co-founder builds the product. And both of these are incredibly important pieces of the puzzle. And if you're going to go the route where you do everything yourself, that's completely fine. But just understand you're going to have to do all of the steps yourself. And there's a lot of steps. If you haven't noticed, we're only on step 6 of 10. And all of these steps, as you can imagine, have several steps inside of them. One thing that I want to bring up when you're looking for a co-founder is, if this was all your idea and this, you've tested it and vetted it, and you've, built the landing page and started pre-marketing, is you kind of want to keep 51%, right? This is your company. This is your idea. You want to make sure that you don't get, forced out, or that, the partner that you're co-founding with has more say in the company than you do, because then you don't get to build what you want, and you want to be able to build what you want. So try to keep 51% at least. And, maybe you can talk them down. A technical co-founder that maybe, if it's a really easy SaaS to build, might not need to take 49%. Maybe they're okay with just taking 30%. But the whole thing is, each route has its pros and cons, right? If you're going to code it all yourself, that's a lot of time and a lot of work. If you hire somebody, it's a lot of money and a lot of headache, in my experience. And if you partner with a co-founder, you have to give up equity in your company. So either way that you go, you're going to have to give up something. So you just have to decide for yourself what it is that you want to give up. Do you want to give up your own time? Do you want to give up your money, or do you want to give up your equity? And that's kind of what you have to decide for yourself. So the next step is going to be to test, and then change, and then test, and then change, and then test and change. And notice it runs off the end of the screen, because you're going to continue this process essentially forever. Whether you code it yourself, partner with someone, hire someone, it doesn't matter. You want to continually test the product. And it's something that's really important in the beginning, because you do not want to send out a product to customers that doesn't work. If you send out something that falls apart the first time a customer uses it, then you're going to lose that customer probably forever. And you don't want to put yourself in a position where you've got, from pre-marketing, you've got a lot of these interested customers that are actually going to be your core customers of your product, and then lose them all day one because there's some issues with your software. So you want to test it a lot. And the whole point of the step is actually to try to break your software. You want to intentionally break your software. I know that sounds a little confusing and maybe a little mean to do to the software, but the whole point is to find all of the weak points and then fix them. Because if you don't, one of your users will undoubtedly accidentally stumble into one of the weak points, and they will fall through the cracks, and they'll break the software, and they'll be really upset. But you don't want to spend an astronomical amount of time on this, because you can get obsessive. You do want to launch an MVP, or a minimum viable product. But the thing is, the minimum is not an untested product, right? The minimum is that you spend at least a couple weeks testing it, going through all the possible use cases that you can think of, and fixing any issues that pop up. Because if you don't, your users will. And that brings us actually to our next step, which is beta launch. And the whole point of this step is to have a real user, as in someone besides you or your best buddy, actually use the software in a way that they're actually going to be using it, and get them to break it. Because the whole point of a beta launch, and you might not really understand this, is to have a real user break your software, because then you can fix it. Right. And this is why in a beta launch, you actually don't want to have a very big launch. Like, you can actually just have a beta launch with a dozen, 2 dozen, maybe 50 people. And you want to pick people that are going to give you feedback, because that's really important. Like, you don't want someone just to use the software and they accidentally break it and they're like, okay, well, I'm never going to use this again, and then they leave. You want to listen to what they have to say. So you want to have, people that are going to be constantly communicating with you, saying, hey, I tried to do this in your software and then this happened, and I don't think that was supposed to happen. And so you're like, oh, that's really weird. And so then you kind of look into it and you say, oh, wow, that is a bug. That is an issue that I'm going to need to fix, or that I need to get my developer to fix. And you can work through that with these people. So the people that you want to pick for your beta launch, and hopefully you have the option to pick, because you might not be able to. You might just have to beta launch with the small group of people that you have. But if you can pick people that are going to give you their honest feedback, and you can let them use your software for free. You can do a limited time for free just for the beta, or you can say, hey, you know what? You can have this software for life as long as you beta test it and give me your honest feedback. And that's kind of the goal with this whole beta launch, is to do something really small. Because if you launch to a really, really big audience, let's say you are able to amass thousands of people on an email list while you're building this that are super excited for the launch, and then you get a bunch of people to use it day one, and some bug happens and it crashes the whole thing, and all those users are upset, then they're probably all going to leave, and odds are they might not come back at all. And so you've lost all those potential users. Whereas if you start really small with just a few dozen people and they break it, then yeah, maybe you'll actually lose a dozen or 2 dozen customers, but you'll fix that bug, and then you can continue acquiring customers at a slower pace, and fixing and pivoting and adding and building as you go along. And this is a lot better to do than trying to launch something that's massive, and one little tiny thing goes wrong and you can lose a lot of customers. So you want to do a beta launch, something that is really small, low key, and very intimate with your customers, so that you can have that feedback and line of communication. And that rolls us into the second to last step. We are almost done here. The second to last step, which is getting feedback and fixing. It's very similar to the past couple steps, right? Constantly making sure that any bugs that are found are fixed. And you really want to do this before you try to grow and scale the software. Because if you try to grow and scale a software that's riddled with bugs and has issues and isn't working appropriately all the time, then that's just going to get amplified as you scale, right? If you have issues already and you try to scale something that has issues, you're going to magnify those issues. So if your customers are already unhappy because a certain feature doesn't work or because something is broken, and you're like, well, okay, I'm just time to pour thousands of more customers into this product, you will have a very bad time. I'm going to tell you right now. So be sure you have a solid product before you try to scale it. All right. And the best way to do that is just listen to your users. All right. Be available to them, like legitimately available. Something that's a really good idea is actually to have like a live stream every week where you go through how to use your product, and you just do a Q&A and you answer questions. You want to connect with your users and be available. Just email, chats, DM, it doesn't matter how you're communicating with them as long as you are. One big thing that I want to point out here is that you will get feature requests. Like, people are going to say, wow, I do like your software, but it would be really great if it had this thing. And you don't necessarily want to listen to every request that comes in, because what you do is you expand beyond your scope when you do that. And expanding beyond your scope, although it sounds really good, right? It sounds like, yeah, I can expand my software and I can add this feature and add this, and I'm going to be known as the company that does all the everythings. And when you're a company that does all the everythings, you end up being a company that does nothing, because in the end, you're too spread thin, right? So you're not the best software at any particular one thing. You're just kind of like a software that does all of one thing, but you do it mediocre. And so people will most likely want to go to a competitor that just has the one thing that they need. And that goes back all the way back to step one, where you're going to look at other companies that are really big and have all these different features, and maybe you just build your software to be one of those features, but you do it a lot better. So you don't want to turn into the kind of thing that you're building your company off of, right? That you're taking some of their features and making them better. Because what happens when you add too many features is you can't focus on your core features. And that's what I mean by scope. Is when you first start your company, your goal is to build one particular product, right? One particular software. And as you expand beyond that, you're going to compromise quality. Now, you can say, oh, no, I won't, all this. But every company that has ever tried to scale beyond their scope has always sacrificed quality of the original product to amplify or to grow their company. So you don't want to do that. If anything, you want to just start an entirely separate project, okay, and leave this one where it is. And then you can partner the two if you wanted, but be weary on feature requests. Now, I'm not going to say no to every feature request, but I would say probably 90-something% of feature requests comes in are not going to be good or not something you want to implement. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to them. So some of them could be really good. So you do want to listen to them, but again, I'd say probably 90-something% of the feature requests that you're going to get are not going to be something that you want to implement. So just try to understand what your core scope is, and then only build on the product exactly what's going to be inside of that scope. All right, we are on the final and last step, which is everyone's favorite part, but it's actually my least favorite part, and that is scaling your business. And the reason I don't like this part is because, again, I like actually building and coding stuff. So this part is just not super fun for me, but it is really important, and it's arguably one of the most important steps for long-term wealth and long-term sustainment of your company. And the best play for scaling. Now, there's so many methods out there for marketing and blah, blah, blah. I could build an entire course on how to market a SaaS. There's so many ways out there. I'm just going to talk about really the best play for long-term and sustainable growth, and that is search engine optimization and content marketing. Really just content marketing, right? Just building and making useful content for users and for people that you want to be users of your software. That is going to be the pretty much best method to grow your business, and it's going to be slow. I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to be slow. And so you can actually start this process before you even finish your product, right? So maybe you've got your main front-facing website up, but your product's not completely done yet. You can start maybe adding a blog, right, is the best way, and start writing content. Or if you can hire a writer, but again, that's going to be a trade-off there, right? Your time versus your money. That's something that you always need to be thinking about, is I can do this myself, or I can hire someone to do it, but it's going to be expensive, right? It's going to cost a certain amount of money. But the kind of content you want to make really depends on the SaaS and the market that you're going into. If you're a B2B type SaaS or business to business, then blogs and tutorials and like how to do stuff makes a lot of sense. If you're B2C, well, then it's entirely dependent on your niche. Let's say you have a software that helps you track the location of your dog, right? So maybe you write about dogs, and you write about dogs getting lost and how to find lost dogs. So that's content that's relevant to your niche, relevant to your market, and also leads into something that your product can solve. And so you don't actually want to sell your product in every single post, right? You only occasionally want to do it. The whole point with content marketing is to actually solve other people's problems through the content. Now, I get that your software also solves their problems through a paid route, but you really just want to try to give away as much content as you can completely for free and get people coming back to your site over and over for the information that they're getting is so valuable, because they're like, man, if this information that I'm getting is so valuable, I bet their product or their software is really good too. And this is just marketing like 101 for any kind of business. It's not necessarily SaaS dependent, although it works really well with SaaS because SaaS is obviously built into the browser, so people don't actually have to buy things, they don't have to go somewhere, but they can actually just get the product right there and then. And so it makes sense that content marketing is a really good play. Now, are there other methods to build a SaaS? Absolutely. People talk about LinkedIn ads, people talk about Snapchat ads. We at Atlas, which is one of my SaaS, we use Google ads. Understand, like, that's a more expensive route. It's faster, it is, but it's more expensive. So you can potentially get customers faster, but you're going to be paying more money for them. Whereas content marketing takes a lot of time and effort, but it's very low cost. So again, it's all about finding a balance that's right for you. Like if you've got pretty good sum of money, maybe you want to hire a developer and you want to run ads. But if you're bootstrapping from nothing, you're going to want to go for the content marketing route, and you're going to want to build things yourself and do all of it yourself, because your time is not as valuable as someone who has a lot of money and maybe they can hire out all these different things. So closing out this crash course, it kind of comes down to DIY or PAY, as I like to say. You can either do it all yourself, you can learn it all, implement it yourself, or you can pay other people to do it for you. Now, this is the last slide. There's nothing after this, but I just want to point out that you have to understand it's a trade-off, right? And building a business at all is a trade-off, right? It's not just software dependent. You could pay other people, or you can pay a co-founder in equity, or you can, use your time. But at the end of the day, it's all about the trade-off of, am I going to pay or am I going to do it myself? I really hope that this crash course helped you out and that you understand the overarching system of building a SaaS, and that you kind of understand how to start, right? Because the first few steps, they're actually not super hard. Coming up with an idea and verifying that idea and building a little simple lead page and getting people interested are all things that you can do. And maybe you don't know exactly, I have no idea how to code, build a SaaS. That one step was kind of confusing. I don't even know. You don't have to understand thoroughly every single step in order to start the first couple steps. Like, it's okay to not know exactly what you're doing when you get started building this. But the whole point is that you actually get started doing something, right? And whether that be DMing people, asking them if they think that something is a good idea. Hey, would this be a good idea for a software? That's how you get started. That's how ideas spread. That's how they become contagious. That's how people get excited about different products, is just by talking about the product and asking people. So that's really your first step, is just get rolling, deciding on an idea, get that idea in people's heads, start pre-marketing, and then start building. So I hope you enjoy this crash course. I hope you liked it. If you did, please be sure to subscribe and like this video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.